What is GDPR? And more importantly, how does it impact you and your company? Join internationally known data privacy, data protection expert Jonathan Armstrong and Tom Fox, the compliance evangelist, to learn more about the burgeoning world of data privacy and data protection. After listening to this episode, you'll walk away with a greater understanding of what this means for you and your organization. Life with GDPR is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
Over the next 3 podcasts, Jonathan Armstrong and I will be looking at some post-Brexit issues, including data protection, data privacy and data transfer, and sanctions, AML, and export control. In this episode, we take up sanctions, AML, and export control in the United Kingdom after Brexit. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again with Jonathan Armstrong, continuing to visit with us from an undisclosed location, perhaps near London or perhaps not, for Life with GDPR. We're doing a short series on post-Brexit issues, and today we're going to take up a little bit different focus, sanctions, AML, and export control. So, Jonathan, welcome back.
Thanks very much, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Jonathan, these are issues that really came to the fore in the United States under the Trump administration. It was a much more liberal use of sanctions and export control laws. We had a major AML law change become effective January 1 of 2021 when the U.S. Congress overrode President Trump's veto of the National Defense Authorization Act. So these are things that I think really every compliance practitioner is going to have to be thinking about. But I wanted to maybe take a look at it from your perspective in the United Kingdom, and we'll start with sanctions.
Yeah.
Do companies need to keep the same sanctions regimes and protocols in place, have additional sanctions, or what's your sort of macro assessment of what companies need to do for the foreseeable future?
I think there is going to be some change here in the future, and I would certainly be looking at changes relating to Russia and certainly changes relating to China. I think that the UK, in many respects, has taken the lead in terms of some sanctions, and obviously some of the intelligence behind sanctions penalties in the EU was derived from the UK security services. I think there'll still be some harmony in terms of sanctions. So existing EU sanctions will effectively carry across into the UK regime. But I think there's some potential for divergence in future. So if one listens to rumors, there are rumors that the UK, for example, wanted to be tougher with Russia, but there were voices against a toughening regime against Russia, in particular those nations to the east of Europe who rely on Russia for their power or energy needs. And obviously, any sanctions regime that turns the lights off at home isn't something that a government in that part of the world is going to vote for. And I think similarly, some countries in the EU rely on Chinese investment, particularly some of the former Soviet states. The UK does, to some extent, rely on Chinese investment, but perhaps not to the same degree in areas like infrastructure. And the UK government is expressing concern on a regular basis about the plight, particularly of the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang. And the Foreign Secretary made a statement just a couple of weeks ago on that. There are 2 UK parliamentary inquiries into that issue, and there are calls for the sanctions regime to be flexible enough to bring pressure on the Chinese authorities because of the plight of the Uyghur Muslims. If I had my crystal ball out and was predicting the future, I would say that the UK probably would not want to do anything there before the summer because the G7 meeting is going to be in Cornwall in June. And my suspicion is the UK as host country won't want any form of showboating on UK soil. But I think there is a possibility, if there's no agreement reached either bilaterally or through those UN negotiations in June, there's a possibility of the sanctions regime toughening there. So for compliance professionals, there's a sanctions risk. There's also a more general supply chain risk as well, because I think the UK is persuaded that it wants to do something about Xinjiang in particular. The exact form of that remains to be seen.
I believe you've heard that there's been a regime change in the United States and that your beloved prime minister and his consort were not fans of our regime change. Nevertheless, I have seen actions by the prior administration in sanctions that were done in concert with other countries. Would you see that sort of continued, at least discussions with the United States around joint sanctions to at least the two countries you mentioned, Russia and China, and perhaps others? Or do you think that because of the change at the really top of the political leadership, the United Kingdom might go in a different way than the United States?
I think there are some areas where the UK might be more aligned with the current US administration than the former. And the Uyghur Muslims might just be one such area. As you say, Boris seems to be being advised by consort's a nice word, his consort on matters relating to human rights issues and the environment, and that might mean that the Biden administration and the Johnson administration have more of an alliance in those type of areas. Though it should be said that for all the criticism of one can level at Trump's door, I don't think he didn't turn his eyes to the Uyghur crisis particularly, and the US, I know, looked at some ways of responding to that, whether that was because of a genuine concern about the plight of Uyghur Muslims, or whether it was because of a greater play between the Trump administration and China, is above my pay grade to have an opinion on. But I think there will be more. I think the unanimity, there's always been broad unanimity between the UK and the US on sanctions regimes. I think that will continue. And possibly with two exceptions. You remember that the UK does not like the prohibition on dealing with Cuba, particularly Iran less so. So the UK will not follow the US's lead in respect of those two countries, I think.
Let me now turn to anti-money laundering, because as I indicated in our opening, we had a major reform in the United States, the first major reform on some AML issues since the 2004-03 timeframe, and that's largely around shell corporations, ultimate beneficial owners, and anonymous owners of corporations. Has the U.S. change impacted what the UK is doing, or has the UK had its own reforms, which has led to a more robust system that you are advising clients to fully embrace and have policies and procedures around?
Yeah, I think the UK has always, let's just say, talked a good game on AML for the longest time. So there's always criticism, particularly of the real estate market in London. But AML legislation has been around in the UK for a long time. It has been enforced, and we do broadly care about these things. You know, you need only look into investigations like the Abori investigation into money laundering involving Delta State Nigeria, to know that the UK hasn't been shy of taking on big cases from time to time. And the legislation that allows the UK to bring in sanctions, its short name is SAMLA, also allows the UK to mirror the EU AML regime, and also to preserve and introduce additional UK legislation as well. So I think in AML terms, things will probably look somewhat similar post-Brexit to pre-Brexit. The EU's sixth anti-money laundering directive won't become law in the UK. This was one of those pieces of legislation that was almost on the cusp and didn't get in as a directive quickly enough. And as you'll remember, directives are funny things. They're not the same as regulations in terms of enforcement into local law. So there will be the odd difference because the EU regime has been updated through the sixth directive that the UK's won't. But I think in practical terms, the real difference we'll see is there'll be an extra list to check against to make sure that whatever you're doing complies with, US laws, UK laws, and EU laws.
Jonathan, one of the unique aspects of UK AML regimes, at least different from the United States, is unexplained wealth orders. And are those still in force? And can the Serious Fraud Office or other Crown Prosecution Services still use those under appropriate circumstances?
Yes, they are. And I hear rumors that there are some cases on the way under those rules as well. So, yeah, they were, if you like, a UK domestic invention. You'll remember that there was a big case on that over unexplained wealth that was, let's just say, disposed of in Harrods. And I think that that's something that the UK still looks at as a weapon in the enforcement armory.
Jonathan, we could turn now to export control. And this was a major, that's probably not fair. I don't want to say a major initiative, but a major change in focus by the Trump administration. They used export control much more aggressively. Because they used it much more aggressively, I think they used more targeted sanctions, less of a broad scope, but more focused, more pointed, and a lot more export control directives. Is the UK companies still need to have those policies and procedures in place? And from time to time, do you have to counsel clients on issues around export control?
Yes, we do. And thankfully, that's Andre, not me. But the export control rules more or less still apply. That's more or less the EU regime transposed into UK law. And those rules remain complex, particularly around things like dual-use goods, so goods that might have a military use and a civil use, like, I don't know, bolts and screws in aeroplane wings, etc., etc. So there's so the regime's broadly the same. There's an awful lot of technical detail there, and again, there are two regimes at play. Now, of course, because the Department for International Trade in the UK will look at controlling and monitoring compliance with the export control rules, and the same criminal provisions apply. So HMRC and the Crown Prosecution Service can prosecute offences when required. So I know that DIT are building up a team to look at this specifically, and I think we can expect the UK to still care about things like export controls.
I would just note for our audience that a component of the Airbus enforcement action in the United Kingdom was around export control and information which got to the Crown Prosecution Service, leading to the the full scope of the Airbus settlement in the United Kingdom was information and evidence developed by that part of the UK government. So I guess it would lead me to conclude that the criminal offenses still can exist for export control as well as anti-money laundering and sanctions even after Brexit in the United Kingdom. Would that be a fair assessment?
I think it would, and I think, again, we might see convergence driven by the divergence driven by the UK's slightly different political tolerances. So, again, watch out for activity on former Soviet states, on China, where the UK may not be as tolerant as the EU was.
Jonathan, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time, but for our listeners, all of the topics we've talked about in the post-Brexit series are more fully fleshed out on the Quarterly website. We're going to link to those resources in our show notes. As more post-Brexit issues arise, I hope we can continue this conversation.
Thank you, Tom.
This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode with Jonathan Armstrong on Life with GDPR. You can reach Jonathan at Quarterly Compliance in London. You can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Check out the show notes for more information on the KBR decision from the Quarterly website and for information on GDPR compliance generally. I hope you will join us again for another episode as Jonathan and I start a 3-part series on some early significant enforcement actions and information regarding GDPR. Thanks so much for listening.